A very good evening. Welcome to this other side of the studio. Now, in 1987, Hezekiah Ochuka and Pancras Okumu were executed by hanging for their role and involvement in the failed coup to oust the then president, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. Now, 36 years later, there's still that provision in the Constitution. A judge is allowed to give a death sentence for the capital offenses. But however, since then, 36 years later, people are on death sentence, but they're yet to be executed. So if the provision is there in the Constitution, why is it not being effected? Tonight here on Legally Speaking, we talk about the death sentence puzzle. With me on set is Robin Karani, advocate of the High Court, and Elijah Rotok, human rights advocate, KNCHR. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to have you here. I know this is, last week it was making headlines. Many people like Judge Nzioka gave Joseph Irungu a death sentence. And people are trying to unpack, what does a death sentence really mean? And before we even get into it, I want to understand what Kenyans think about the death sentence. So, Director, if we have that, you can play it.
In a recent court ruling, Joey Rongo was convicted in a high-profile murder case of businesswoman Monica Kimani and was sentenced to death, a decision that has ignited the contemptuous debate from citizens. Now, do you think Kenya should execute death sentence? This is what Kenyans had to say on Your Opinion Matters.
Hii hukumu ya kifungo ni kama iliondolewa. Na tumeshangaa kusikia jana mtu anafungwa maisha, anafungwa kunyongwa. Sasa tukauliza kwani walipatilisha tena kifungo ikaruti ya maisha ya kunyongwa. Sasa hapo tunataka tuambiwe hii katiba ilipitishwa juzi ama ni ile ya zamani.
Kuhusu Kenya kujaji mtu kifo, ukweli wa maneno, kama mimi mwananchi wa Kenya hatuna imani na kitu ambacho kinaitwa serikali pamoja na majudges. Juu mara nyingi tunaona ya kwamba vitu zinatendeka kwa upendeleo. Juu wewe ukiwa kwa serikali ya nchi, makosa yako haionekani. Ufanye makosa, hiyo makosa haitambuliki kama makosa. Lakini ukiwa nje ya serikali, wewe makosa yako inaonekana. Sasa kwa leo hii, tukisikia kwamba mtu anajajiwa kifo, tunashangaa sana sababu Kenya tayari walisatuambia kwamba hakuna hukumu ya kifo.
Mtu akikosa akiua mtu mwenzake, inatakana koti ikifanya hivyo ashikwe, afungwe hata maisha. Ndio ambapo iwe funzo kwa wengine. Kwa maana watu wanauana kiunyama na mambo sheria, ukienda kwa sheria wanapeleka hiyo wanaachilia mtu.
Kwa wale wenye wanaua wanaua mademu, mimi nadhani tuko sawa tu. Iko sawa, wakihukumiwa kifo wako sawa, iko sawa.
Mimi nakumbuka death sentence ilitolewa wangu. Hakuna mtu ananyongango siku hizi. So death sentence lakini bado huyo jamaa unajua amemharibia maisha. So sioni kiwa sawa.
Those are some of the sentiments citizens had to say in regards to death sentence in Kenya. On Your Opinion Matters, Martin Masharia, Lookuptv, Nairobi.
Thank you, Martin Masharia, for that report. Now, those are sentiments of some Kenyans, as you can get very varied views. Some say, yeah, execution should be done. They seem to have an understanding of the execution has not been happening in Kenya for quite a while. There's also one person who said that they don't really have faith in the justice system. They feel like there's a lot of favoritism. So, Robin, I'll start with you. Let me just pick your mind on the understanding of Kenyans on death sentence.
Okay, thank you so much for having me today. Let me start by wishing everyone a happy International Forest Day.
Right.
As you can see, I'm dressed in green today. I'm from planting trees.
Oh, that's the reason.
Yes.
Oh, good.
But just from where we've picked it from what people are saying, I would say there's a big disconnect about what is actually there and what people seem to take as the norm.
Right.
Now, to begin with, you rightfully put it, the last people to be executed were Hezekiah and Pancras. Well, there were 4. There were 2 others. And nobody really cares about the two others. And that's how it has been happening. Now, death penalty in Kenya is actually legal. It's lawful. It's constitutional. That it has never gone anywhere. What I mean is, all the things that we have been fighting over is that we only have 4 rights that are unlimited, that cannot be limited, that are absolute. And that includes the fair trial, freedom from torture, cruel and inhumane treatment, slavery, and an order of habeas corpus. But all the others can be limited. Now, our constitution, when it gives you the right to life, it also gives that opening for limitation and says your right to life can be deprived
in the event that you
in accordance with the constitution or any other written law. Now, this any other written law is what we call the penal code. It gives the crimes and the penalties for what to suffer when you do a specific crime. Now, the death penalty is introduced for, again, around 5 crimes. One is murder, the other one is treason, the other one is oathing for a capital offense, the other one is robbery with violence, and attempted robbery with violence. Those ones have a death penalty. Now, the legal baloo that has been going on was that all these penalties for death in those 5 crimes are written as shall. So it gives a mandatory nature of that death sentence, that if the court finds you guilty
of treason,
it must give you that death sentence. And so before we had the old constitution, the biggest court was the Court of Appeal. So we had a case in 2008 called Mutiso versus Republic, for those who would remember, that focused on that thing, that said this shall thing gives it such that that judge, so when you're taken to court, that judge has something we call sentencing power once he convicts. But that's supposed to be a discretion. It's supposed to be the court to say, according to what you've done and the mitigating circumstance, this is the sentence you deserve. But if it comes as shall, even if you cry, you put your hands up, it will be a death sentence.
To just be mandatory, that it has to be
so
executed.
In 2008, the Court of Appeal, then being the apex court, said that that mandatory nature was unconstitutional according to the old constitution. Then we did the new constitution, and the new constitution also agreed and let in the death penalty as lawful, but it still contained that mandatory nature. So that's when we have the case that everybody remembers called Murwateto. That's the one you will hear people saying death sentence ilitolewa. And what the Supreme Court just said was repeated what it said in the Court of Appeal said in Mutiso, that it should not be mandatory. It is lawful, but the court can give you a different
So it means then that not all these capital offenses should result into a death sentence.
Well, it means you can be given a death sentence, but it is not.
But you don't have to get a death sentence.
So the thing that they have been attacking is that I told you there are 4 rights that cannot be limited. One of them is a right to fair trial. And so the process of a fair trial begins with you going to court, going to the police station, being presented in court for plea, going through a hearing, the court deciding you have a case to answer, you defending yourself, and then it goes to convict. After conviction, then we have sentencing. So you will hear people when in court they are told, toa malilio yako. That is the point where you say, oh, now you have found me guilty. I have a family, I only did this because I was hungry and stuff like that. And so the court tries to be lenient based on your circumstance. And that's what we call discretion. Yes.
Right. And Elijah, from Kenyans, some think, actually some people should be executed for murder. So who then decides, from a human rights perspective, who then decides that, oh no, death sentence could not be moral? Who decides that? If Kenyans then think, yeah, in this case it can be executed, in this case it doesn't have to be executed.
Thank you very much. I think what we just saw, the clip from Kenyans, is a true reflection of how the perceptions in society is towards this question of death penalty. And from our perspective, since as early as 2007, as Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, we've had a position that our state should abolish the death penalty. They've been varied reasons. First of all, for us, is that it is an ultimate breach of the right of human rights, and specifically the right to life. So if we want to say that we want to preserve the sanctity of life, that we say that life begins at conception, then this right should be enjoyed up until the natural life of someone until they die. And so to us, also to pick up from where he talked about the rights that cannot be derogated, one of it is freedom against torture, cruel and degrading treatment. Now, when you put someone to the death sentence and then you do not now execute, so you have individuals on death row and they do not know their status. That amounts to mental torture, and also the degrading treatment in terms of how they are treated even while in prison, brings out other human rights violations that really are not to the betterment of our society. We have undertaken informed social audits, looking at conducting surveys from the members of the public, and even going to prisons, even also members of the criminal justice system. And indeed, at first you would find that 51% of Kenyans are still saying we still retain the death penalty. But when you come to the other side, where you now have the actual practitioners, that is ranging from police, probation officers, prosecutors, judges, magistrates, and even the prisoners themselves, 90% would say, no, this thing should be done away with. And look at the successive governments. I want us to go back to the regime of Kibaki. He commuted over 4,000 persons who are on death row to life sentences. Followed by Uhuru Kenyatta, followed 2,700, over 2,700 inmates commuted from death row to life. Uhuru did the same, and also RUTO last year commuted all persons who are on death row at that time to life sentences. Now, for this Murwatetu case, even the court went further and said we need to redefine what is the meaning of life. When you're given life sentence, should it mean the natural life until you die, you will stay in prison? Or should it mean a certain number of years? Then they found that there should be a framework to define this, because when a sentence is indeterminate, then again it breaches these provisions of rights. Again, when you look at that right to fair trial, when we went to prison, 43% said first they did not understand what was going on in court. A further 27% were not accorded an advocate. Remember, these are capital offenses, and majority of the crimes that under capital offenses are robbery with violence cases. So when you look at young people who are trying to make ends meet and they are at their wits' end, either trying to rob someone of a mobile phone, either using a club or a rungo or something, then these persons are put in for robbery with violence, and they are unaware that they are facing a death sentence. And so when you see society coming to this, then we need to take a different approach and say, wait a minute, look at the social economic status of these persons. Majority of the offenders are poor. They have low, and they have precarious jobs or very low income, and also most are men. Of course, they are breadwinners of their families, and so when
wouldn't that though now give people a leeway, knowing that then robbery violence will cease to be very grave if then you just get to do some time and not life or death sentence?
The idea for this is that we need to look at the gravity. When you look at in a global spectrum, for those countries that are still using the death penalty, they use the term the rarest of the rare, meaning the offense should be of such a grave nature. Look at the International Criminal Court, for instance, when they hanged former president of Iraq, so Saddam Hussein. So the gravity should, for death sentences in those countries, they leave it to very serious offenses. Now, today in our country, we still have challenges within our criminal justice system that hinder the right to fair trial. Okay. And even the right of unarrested persons. Majority of persons who are still arrested still complain of the manner in which they were arrested. Either they were beaten up, they were either interrogated in a way that actually breached their rights. And so when some of these issues are really interrogated, when eventually you look at the outcome of the case, you see that there was a miscarriage of justice. Okay. And in this, then it calls for us to rethink again. Should we be placing the mandatory death penalty to such instances? As a country, if we are to preserve that right to life, the dignity of the person, that you shouldn't torture an individual, then we should be considering having the death penalty abolished. Remember, any country that stays a period of 10 years without executing any person is categorized as a de facto state in terms of placing a moratorium on the death sentence. Right. For us, we've done already over 3 decades, and we are only the one in 22 African countries that still yet haven't abolished completely the death penalty. So with the global scale moving towards the abolition, then Kenya should not be left behind. And given the preceding nature or the conduct in which we are having our criminal justice system, the commutal of death sentences into life, is testament that clearly we are actually moving in that direction, which is positive, and therefore we should actually abolish it as a country. Okay,
so there is the Penal Code Amendment Bill that is seeking to, change the penalties in the capital offences. So, and the Chief Justice Martha Koome is also pushing for these amendments. But why are they coming now, after so many years of the death sentence still being within the confines of the Constitution?
First of all, I want to address an issue of intent and dishonesty among the institutions of state. Now, he has rightly put how many inmates have been commuted from death row to life sentences by different presidents. What he doesn't note is that all this was done for one reason, that a death row convict is not subjected to physical labor. So when they are commuted to life sentence, the government has 4,000 new people that they cannot commit to physical labor. Right. That's the actual truth of why they do that. Now, he has also pointed to us how there was an order to define on how to define the life sentence. There was also an order for the AG to do a detailed explanatory brief on what that judgment says and how it affects the people, and have it communicated to the public. When you hear people saying death sentence was ilitolewa, and saying that with actually
with confidence,
death sentence ilitolewa, it's an actual thing to say that the office that my colleague here and my senior holds has actually withheld that information, the truthful information to the people, for them to continue holding that perspective. So at the end of the day, the quagmire remains that yes, we have the death penalty. It was introduced to us by the British colonial government. But Africans, when African governments came in, they would rarely use it. And it was said to be, they used to call it preserved for offenders who have repeatedly made themselves dangerous beyond limitations and beyond endurance of other people. That is how it was defined, for you to get that death penalty by Africans. But as long as we continue to hold it, and as long as people playing around human rights, prosecution, politics,
Right.
and continue to go around it. We have had even the UN give resolutions for countries to limit or to do away with the death
Abolish it.
penalty. But we don't.
Right.
And there's a reason why we don't,
Still
because
there.
there are certain agencies and certain people around this issue that actually benefit from it.
Okay, and Elijah, now I know human rights advocates will argue that death penalty does not necessarily deter crime. But if someone kills or robbery with violence, then they're executed. Won't that scare people from committing crimes of that nature, the capital offenses?
Well, I want to state that indeed it doesn't deter crime. At times when you look at the legislations that we put in place, you need to be interrogating that some solutions to problems are not legalistic in nature,
Right.
and go beyond the law. So you cannot have only the law as the solution to a particular problem. And in this particular case, you cannot just say that because you're putting the death penalty to certain offenses that you're automatically going to deter. If you look at the data from the National Crimes Research Center and other and even the reports from the National Police Service,
Right.
you would still see that there is a significant number of crime that is being committed in Kenya. That includes murder and also robbery with violence and also attempted. It's only that the level of actual conviction that ends up in conviction might be lower because our criminal justice system in nature has more petty offenders and law that misdemeanors and such, and petty crimes that are congesting our prisons. So to us, if you're going to use the death penalty to deter others, it has been proved by research that it doesn't.
What about
It doesn't stop.
nations, the Emirates, Dubai, where
It
crime
doesn't
is
stop.
very low,
Yes.
and they have very heavy penalties.
In Asia, in the Middle East, and some of the South American countries,
Right.
is where we still have the death penalty being used. And when you look at the legal systems that are in those countries, they are quite different from the legal system that we are using now.
Right.
I'd just like to pick from what he had said. The UK had stopped the death penalty as early as 1969. So by then we had attained our independence. So we need to rethink again whether is it necessary. Again, there are other issues that we are saying that what is the aim of placing someone in a correctional facility or in prison in Kenya? It's supposed to rehabilitate that individual and also then restore them back to society. Now, once you kill someone, then it removes that.
What about retribution for the families?
Yes, again, on the question of retribution, that argument hasn't held. You need to talk to any psychologist across the country. Having vengeance does not cure you, does not make you feel any better. It doesn't address your social concerns, that the loss of property or the loss of life that you from your family member. And in fact, most of the families of the victims, especially of murder,
Right.
who've seen their family member gone through that, are not actually for saying we must see the other person to face the ultimate price of, or either having them to face death. And so to us, it doesn't help, or it doesn't repair or restore.
Right.
The person who is put to death will not know that whatever action has been taken thereafter it's only that the families that will get to understand later out of a criminal procedure.
Right.
That has already happened.
Okay, I do understand. Our time is up, but I want to pick your brain, Robin. The president, the power of mercy that the president has, is it enough to get people who are on death row or life sentence out of prison?
Now, okay, what they can do for death row people is commute them to life sentence, which is what they have been doing. But in terms of presidential pardon, it would not apply to them.
To those capital
it
offenses.
could only apply now once they are now into life sentence, and after a specific time, and once we have defined what a life sentence is, then we can start talking about if that presidential pardon would apply to them. But even as I say that, I just wanted to correct something, that number one, I don't think there is no evidence that it has worked. We are talking as if the only crimes for death penalty are murder and robbery with violence. There is treason and there is oathing for capital offenses.
Right.
Now, the people that we actually know are executed in Kenya are people who tried treason, and they have not tried since then. The colonial government executed over 10,000 people because of the Mau Mau rebellion on the issue of oathing.
Right.
Now, I would not say that that is not evidence that because there's a death penalty for treason and oathing for capital offense, that there have not been such cases since the last people were hanged.
Right. Well, we have to finish. So maybe, Elijah, your final thoughts, even as these amendment bills are in Parliament, are being pushed forward in Parliament, the capital offences bill, and there's still the Penal Code Amendment bill, as well as I know there are two bills of that nature, just trying to lessen the penalties.
Yes, to us we are calling for the implementation of these bills, and we are looking forward for them to pass. It will make our country's image globally progressive in terms of preserving human rights. Also, we are calling for the move towards correctiveness and rehabilitation of inmates, so that we have more persons either who are convicted in death row actually participate in some of the activities that are conducted in prison that they've been left out on, such as getting education and so on.
Right.
And as a commission, we'll still continue to hold campaigns for the removal and the abolishment of the death penalty, because to us, human rights have to be upheld at all times and for each and every person, and we have to be equal before the law. Thank you very much.
Right. Robin, as we wind up.
The people a quote in one of the cases that a law that is caught up in a time right would soon find itself irrelevant and would be swept into the dustbins of history.
Oh, enough said. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being part of this conversation. And lastly, Kenya, we were at number 111 last year in the happy list, and now we are down to 114. It's like we're less happy by the day. I don't know. But thank you so much for being part of this conversation. We have been talking about the death sentence puzzle that many people have been asking questions around it. And let's keep the conversation going across all our social media platforms, just trying to understand how since 1987, no Kenyan has been executed, and the provision is still there in the Constitution and in the Penal Code. That is it from us here on Legally Speaking, a show that comes to you every Thursday. We talk legal matters, just trying to make you understand the Constitution even better, break down those jargons into a language that you understand. I am Nancy Lima. I've been speaking to Robin Karani, advocate of the High Court, and Elijah Rotok, a human rights advocate. Our sign language interpreter for tonight has been Felista Adundo. And I'm Nancy Lima. Have yourselves a pleasant evening. Good night.
We value your feedback and welcome your complaints about our programming and operations. Feel free to get in touch with us through 0700 893 542 or send us an email to